Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Issei saved by Great Red from Death Part 2. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support the Deltans for writing that awesome fanfic and also make sure to comment on this story, link in description. Let's start this video. Azazel wasn't sure what to think about the boy that had just popped up in front of him with no warning and wanted to chat. While he looked calm on the outside, he also prepared to defend himself in case this was a distraction for something else. Well, you'll have to give me more information than that if you want me to know you know more than my name. Nodding his head, Issei could understand where Azazel was coming from, as they didn't know each other in this timeline yet. Heck, no one in the supernatural world outside of Irina's father knew about him. I can understand your concern. You're the Governor General of the main faction of Fallen Angels, as well as you know a ton about sacred gears and have also been looking into making artificial gears. I also have a Longinus level sacred gear, but I don't feel safe showing it off here like I said out in the public. Oh, and for the record, so I can have it out now, I'm Issei Haidu, since I already know your name. While Issei had been talking, Azazel was both listening to him as well as checking his surroundings and was surprised to hear what the boy was saying, as well as that he could find no one else around, so decided to humor the boy and see where it went. Okay Issei, I'll play your game and see where this goes. We can talk at my office, he said, and once getting a nod in acceptance, opened a teleportation circle underneath them that lead to Grigori HQ. Scene skip. Once they got to his office, Issei sat down in one of the chairs in front of his desk while Azazel sat behind it. As Issei started talking, Azazel couldn't help but notice that he could feel what felt like multiple presences in his energy, as well as something else he couldn't place that made the back of his mind tingle. I won't go into detail right now how I learned about the supernatural. I can say I just recently learned about it and my sacred gear, which was enlightening as I learned a lot more about the world, especially when I learned just what gear I had, he said, before bringing out the boosted gear as promised and shocking Azazel as he wasn't expecting that gear, as well as he now possibly had another issue on his hands. Well crap, if Vali felt that power, this could be interesting, Azazel thought, thinking about his daughter that he was taking care of after he had found her on the run from her family and who also happened to be the White Dragon Empress of this generation. The one thing that he had realized early on was that she seemed to always want to battle someone, and with them now finding her gear's intended rival, it could go many different ways. Well, that definitely may cause some issues down the line, but we can get back to that later. How far along are you in meeting Drake? While Azazel was having his own thoughts on the matter, Issei remembered something he'd forgotten about when they decided to approach Azazel. Drake, we might have an issue. I forgot about the fact that Vali was under Azazel's care from a young age, so we might have to deal with him sooner rather than later. You're right, but this might also be a good thing if we can get on his good side early. We won't have to deal with fighting him at a later date, and who knows what sort of training we might be able to do with his help. Drake commented, getting a thoughtful hum from Issei at that thought. Since they had been able to get over their differences in the previous timeline, he knew they should be able to do it once again. He just wasn't sure how it might go with them being a lot younger, as he never really heard any stories from them. Right as Issei went to answer Azazel's question, the door crashed open, surprising Issei, as he wasn't expecting anyone to barge in on them, though after he thought about it a second, he realized it shouldn't be a surprise. Though once he looked back at who barged in, he couldn't help but notice that her energy felt all too familiar. The girl who walked in had long wavy silver-white hair pulled back into a braid, as well as bangs hanging over her face, and just short enough not to block her eyes, and had light blue eyes that he could tell seemed to have a lot of knowledge behind them. Drake, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't her presence feel familiar? And now that I think about it, she almost reminds me of what Vali might have looked like as a girl. I have to agree with you, partner, so if it isn't, we both are wrong. I can also sense Albion on her, so unless Vali was always a girl in the past timeline, but we never noticed it, or something happened in this timeline to change him to her, I can't tell you what's going on. Drake thought back, agreeing with his partner as he was as stunned as Issei on what he was sensing. Brad couldn't help but step in at this time, as he knew what happened after looking into it himself when Issei went to Grigori. That's Vali alright, and something did happen to him, but I won't go into details due to what I saw, and let them tell you if they get their memories back, or depending on how you handle the situation. He commented, but before Issei or Drake could reply back, Vali spoke up. Azazel, where did that energy I just felt come from? Albion just let me know that he sensed his rival in here. But before Azazel could comment, Issei did it for him, just deciding to get it out of the way. That would be me. Issei Haidu at your service. He commented, making her turn towards him as the boosted gear came out. It's been a while, Albion. Drake said as the gear materialized. Seems like you might have a strong host there. Drake. Why are you running around with someone with low power levels? Are you wanting to avoid our battle this time around? Albion said, shocked at what he could feel coming from Issei, but both Volley and Albion were confused when Drake chuckled at his words. Normally I would agree with you, but my host is holding a lot of his power back right now, so it's no surprise you can't feel it. He said out loud, but said to Issei in his head as he could feel his confusion. Well, I'm hiding it for you for now, but the point still stands. Getting a nod of agreement from Issei at that. Volley couldn't help but be excited by that response. How about a fight then right now? 1v1, that's just a spar to see where we're both at. She asked, getting a not surprised look from Azazel as he heard her request, but wasn't sure how Issei would respond. Issei knew that this would come up, but also knew that it was too early. I don't want to fight you, not yet at least, but I can promise I will spar with you at some point, as I just met with Azazel today, so who knows what might happen in the future. He said, getting a nod from Azazel, and when it looked like Volley might disagree, he commented once more to her happiness. How about instead of that, we go somewhere where I can show off some of my power. Azazel couldn't disagree with that as it would hopefully sate some of Volley's interest, as well as he was curious. I wouldn't mind, as like you said we just met, so I don't know much about your power either. Which after getting nods from the two, they stepped out of his office and headed towards a training room. Greg, any ideas on what to do here that might wow them? I know we can just release my power, which I would think should be pretty high even at my age, but do we have any more things to do? Well, I wouldn't normally suggest this, we do have access to your balance breaker, but only for just under a minute before I would have to shut it down, so we could go that route. He suggested, much to Issei's shock, but he decided to go that route and worry about it later. I'll let you do the job of activating it to try and stop any issues from popping up for now. He said, getting a nod from Drake as he didn't disagree. Scene skip. As they reached the training room, Issei went to the center of the room with the other two off to the side. He turned towards Volley. I likely should have asked this earlier but didn't get the chance to. As I already introduced myself, can I get your name as well? Seems only fair. While Volley didn't like the last name she was born with, she couldn't disagree with what he was saying. I don't go by a last name, but you can call me Valion or Volley. Either one works. Nodding, Issei felt better now, so he didn't mess up anytime soon accidentally. At least her name is still the same, and she even is going by what her female name would be. Out loud he commented. Thank you. Now to get on with showing off some of my power to you, he commented before passing the reins to Drake, as well as calling out the boosted gear. Welsh Dragon, Balance Breaker, was called out before a bright flash of red blinded both Azazel and Volley. As Issei saw the bright flash disappear, he couldn't help but notice how shocked the other two in the room looked at how he already had Balance Breaker unlocked, and by the expression on Volley's face, he guessed that she didn't have it unlocked yet on her end. I can't keep this form long, but I also just learned as I asked Drake what we could do walking over here, as he knows more about where my power is right now, he suggested this. He commented, getting no response from the two before Drake went ahead and cancelled Balance Breaker, so there weren't any undue risks. Azazel though couldn't help but notice that when the balance breaker went up, he could also feel two other presences in the background that most would likely not have sensed, the primal power of two other dragons that are even higher than Drake in power, office, and what he was highly suspicious of being coming from the other dragon god Great Red. Scene skip. After that scene, the three of them went back to Azazel's office so they could continue their talk after he showed off his power. So if we go off of what Issei said right before that, show Red Dragon, you know more about how he got this powerful than he does? Azazel asked as he was curious. He'd never heard of anyone this young already having the balance breaker form, but he always knew there would be chances of this happening. And why did I sense who I'm pretty sure was Office and what I thought might be Great Red in the power behind the balance breaker? Just call me Drake, and yes, I do know more about it than Issei does, as the power released when it happened knocked him unconscious, and while I had hoped you wouldn't sense that part, I can easily explain it too. Drake said, sighing, as he dived into the story him and Red had concocted together while Issei was sleeping. I'm honestly not too sure myself how the powers of the two dragon gods came to be inside my current host, but they have allowed him the ability to adapt a lot sooner than most of my hosts at this age, and he has, as you could tell, already gained my balance breaker, thanks to their interference in what only I can guess was either blind luck or something with when he was born made them decide to give this boy their strength for the road ahead, whatever that might entail. With those two, it's never easy to know what they might be thinking. Issei though couldn't help but wonder when Drake had come up with that idea and which his partner was ready to answer. Me and Red talked about it as we knew at some point it might be found out and came up with this idea one night when you were sleeping. He commented, getting an O from Issei at that. After that little bit of information, the three of them sat back to talk more about Issei and his powers, as well as anything else that he might require being answered. Meanwhile, on the outer edge of Kuo, a black magic circle that had the design of snakes all around it in an infinity signal popped up, and out of the circle came Office, but not the one from this timeline. After Red had sent Issei back in time, he'd actually run into her right before he himself time traveled, and there she had learned about the plans Red and Issei had made to travel back in time and try to stop the destruction of their universe, but at the time, the office decided not to do anything and stay in the previous timeline, as she saw no reason to help them in their quest, as she finally could have peace and quiet like she had been hoping for. But now something had changed, and she had decided to travel back in time herself and watch from the sidelines until the time was right to meet him once again. Meanwhile, fast forward 1 month, Citri Mansion. Sona and her parents were sitting down in one of the meeting rooms in the Citri Mansion, while Ajuka sat across from them as he had finally finished looking over her pawns. "What did you find out, Ajuka? I hope it wasn't anything too major." Revan, Sona's father, asked, having instantly contacted Ajuka through Serafal once they learned what had happened, though it took a month before they had heard back from him, and he wasn't sure what to think. "From what I was able to determine, I do have mostly good news, but maybe some bad too, depending on how you take it," he said, getting confused looks from everyone else. To start, the 4 pawns that turned a darker shade of blue than the original have actually turned into mutation pieces, and from what I can determine that's what caused the lightning, he said before Sona stood up shocked at what happened. "Mutation pieces? But how did that happen? I thought that would only happen when you receive them or if they are in someone already." Nodding his head at her words, Ajuka continued. "You would normally be right as those are the only times I've ever seen, but in this case, it did happen, and that leads to my next point. From what I've been able to determine, the pieces have been claimed," he said, and before anyone could step in with anything else to say, he continued. "I tried to use them on an animal to see if I could, and not even me as the creator could use them. What does this mean?" "I get what you mean about the pieces being already claimed but nothing else." Ariel, Sona's mom, asked. "Well, whoever has claimed the pieces must be powerful for him to require all 8 pieces, and I have an idea on that I'll come back to in a minute, but for 4 pieces to mutate at once makes me even more sure that they will be a powerful asset when you find them," he said, getting another look of shock from everyone as Sona asked another question. "You said you have an idea on who it might be?" "Yes. At one point when I was holding the pieces, I had a vision where I was able to see someone in red armor, which after searching for images that matched it, I was able to determine that whoever is your pawn will be the latest generation of the Red Dragon Emperor. That explains all 8 pieces, but whatever happened to cause 4 to mutate, I can't even begin to guess at this moment," causing Sona's parents' eyes to widen as they realized how big of a deal this was, and a confused look from Sona as she didn't recognize the name, which turned to shock once her mother realized that and explained it to her. Revan came back to his senses the quickest and had one more question for Ajuka. "Well, that's honestly surprising that we would have the Red Dragon Emperor as a part of my daughter's peerage, as well as the boost that we might have at having him or her on the devil's side. Do you have any ideas on who it might be at this moment?" "Not a clue, and that is also one of the things that was keeping me from having this meeting sooner, as I wanted to look into if I could find the Emperor and at least get eyes on him or her, but I couldn't find anything on the latest generation. I do plan on keeping an eye out for them as well as have put out some feelers and will let you know if I find anything," he said before catching the looks coming from Revan and his wife and stepping in before they could say anything. "Please, don't think anything about me helping out in this situation as it's something I'm curious about myself, since I have never seen anything like this before and we all know how Serafal will handle this," he said, getting nods from everyone else as they thought about the one Citri member that wasn't there as they knew how she was. All it took somehow was that Ajuka promised to keep her up to date the instant he found anything out. But that out of the way, the group settled back and talked more about how to find the Red Dragon Emperor and what it might entail with them and Sona's peerage. 6 months after meeting Vali and Azazel, Issei was seen in a friendly sparring match with Azazel, with Vali watching from nearby. Not long after meeting the two, Issei had talked with his parents into letting him train with Azazel in his supernatural powers and had come up with the story of Drake had a contact that could get him in touch with Azazel for training purposes thanks to a favor that he owed one of the previous hosts of the boosted gear, which was an interesting idea to Azazel, and he agreed to the plan on getting his parents' approval. They didn't mind the idea as long as Issei was allowed to come home at least once a week or on the weekends, and so Issei moved out to Grigori for training. During the last 6 months, Issei had been training to get his strength up once again and had been able to handle his balance breaker for up to 2 days, which was a major shock to Azazel that the boy was showing such an improvement at his age. He was able to use Dragon Shot once more and had even been able to get some basic sword training in from Azazel and the kendo girls that he could put to use in the future. He couldn't help but thank whoever would listen that Azazel didn't try and figure out too hard what sword he had, as he still wasn't ready to risk showing Ascalon and alerting heaven. But the kendo girls, he'd been on and off training with them, and all three of them had gotten better at sword work than they were before they started, since the two girls hadn't gotten into kendo yet too much by this time in their lives. He also had been teaching them more about the supernatural and what all he had gone through in the previous timeline, and they were stunned at what all went on behind the scenes at the school. Bali still didn't have access to her balance breaker, but she was well on her way to gaining it and was slowly working her way to winning more fights against Issei, though he was mostly able to win any spars they had due to his better knowledge of his powers, as well as Albion's. Right as Issei was fighting Azazel, he also couldn't help but feel in the back of his mind that something was different today, but couldn't place what it was until Drake chimed in letting him know what he was feeling. "I'd been looking for a good opportunity to point this out to you, partner, but I got a surprise for you that could honestly go either way," Drake commented, getting a confused look from Issei and a pause in the spar, which thankfully Azazel noticed and stopped what he was doing, as he wanted to see what might happen next. "Even without you having your pawn pieces back, it seems like we have access to both Triania and Crimson promotion, but for a limited time, just like when we first showed off your balance breaker. If I'm being honest, I don't know how much time you would have in the forms, but I say we give it a try, and who knows, it might trigger one or both of their memories seeing the form," he finished, getting a thoughtful nod from Issei at that. "Screw it, let's go for Crimson promotion. That one can be more easily explained than the Triania, if it comes to it, in my opinion, as an unknown form that the chant came to my head," Issei said, agreeing with Drake as he flew down to the ground and prepared to start the chant. Azazel meanwhile was watching with interest on what Issei was going to do. He'd been astounded at the potential that the boy had at such a young age and was always excited to see what might happen in these spars, as sparse as they were, and what else Issei might conjure up. He also was silently happy on the fact that Issei seemed to be able to get Bali out of her shell some and away from some of her fascination with battles. What he wasn't expecting was for Issei to start chanting some chant and hope that it wasn't what he thought it might be. "I who is about to awaken am the Red Dragon Emperor who has discarded the principles of domination. I shall walk the road of righteousness by having infinite hopes and dreams. I shall become the king of Crimson Dragon, and I promise you all, I shall show you the future which shines in true crimson light. Cardinal Crimson full drive." Right after the final chant, a bright red flash blinded both Azazel and Bali, and as the light dimmed, they were both surprised at the sight of Issei in his Cardinal Crimson armor, the likes of which neither of them had seen before, with Azazel taking quite a lot of interest in the form. It looked to him like an upgraded form of the regular balance breaker and had a much darker red color than the normal form. He had also never heard of the chant used before, but it sounded like a different form of the Juggernaut Drive chant he had read up on when he found Bali, as well as his own research. Bali wasn't too sure what to think about the new armor that Issei had just shown them and couldn't help but be excited over the feeling of the armor, but she couldn't tell why it got her that way. "Drake, how long do you think I have in this form? I doubt I can hold it long if what has happened in the past is anything to go by," Issei asked, getting ready to activate the Fang Blast booster attack against Azazel, pretty sure he'd be able to handle the attack easily. With his untrained body in the crimson armor, he didn't think he'd be able to put much force into the attack. "That's a good question and one I honestly don't have an answer to right now, as I only just recently discovered you could use this form again, though it seems to be some sort of empty form of the normal form, since you don't have your pawns in you yet. Past it I can't give a good explanation until we look into it more. Though to answer your question, I don't think you can handle it for more than 5 minutes, and I'm sure that if you use the cannons, that timer will end instantly afterward." Drake commented his thoughts and getting a thoughtful hum from Issei, as he could understand what Drake was talking about. What Issei hadn't noticed as he talked to Drake was that Azazel looked like he might shit himself as he felt the power behind the cannons. Azazel was about to shit himself after he felt the power that could come out of the cannons on the back of Issei's armor, as he wasn't sure how much damage they would cause. Even if he were to survive the attack, he thought that it'd for sure to do damage to Grigori, and he didn't know how much at that, so he prepared to throw his own attack to hopefully cancel out the attack, or at least diminish it some. Azazel also noticed a nagging in the back of his mind at something, but he pushed it away with the current issue. The same thing was happening to Vali as Albion was yelling at her that they had to be prepared for whatever was coming and erect as strong a barrier as she could, and she did exactly that, having never heard Albion sound so nervous in the small time she had known him. At this time, Issei had finally come out of his inner thoughts and realized what Azazel was getting ready to do, and his fight-or-flight instincts kicked in automatically and activated the dividing wyvern fairies in his armor to help survive the attack, thinking it was coming for him instead of to take care of his attack. Right as that happened, Issei's attack released and Azazel did the same while the wyverns moved in to tank the attack. Issei all of a sudden felt a massive headache hit him once again, causing him to lose focus and end his attack right as the same thing happened to Azazel and his attack as the headache hit, as well as he could vaguely hear what sounded like a grunt from Vali nearby as she had the same thing happen to her. Thankfully, with the loss of Issei and Azazel's concentration, their attacks disappeared and they both were safe from the attacks. As soon as Issei was able to, he moved down to the ground level as he realized what must have happened and wasn't sure how it would go this time around since they had been a part of the supernatural in the previous timeline, unlike the Kendo girls who only had learned about the supernatural right before Trihiksa broke free. Meanwhile, Sona Sitripov. Sona had been sitting with her parents watching a raiding game going on when she suddenly felt the pouch she kept with her at all times, now with her pawn pieces start shaking and warming up once again. Standing up to get the pouch out of her pocket, the action immediately catching the attention of her parents who realized something was happening once more to their daughter's pieces. Finally getting them out of her pocket, she dumped them out onto a nearby table and saw that they seemed to be glowing a bright blue once more and were shaking, but there wasn't any lightning this time around. Now what's going on with them, I wonder? She thought out loud as the pieces calmed down once more and went back to their normal color of blue. They haven't done anything in over 6 months, so I wonder what caused them to react this time. Her mother agreed, watching as Sona put the pieces back in her pouch, since it seemed like they were done with whatever they were going to do, and her husband called Ajuka with the latest news as he had requested to be notified as soon as possible when something happened. When Sona picked back up the pawns, she suddenly felt like a link was opened in her mind, sending new emotions into her brain that she recognized as coming from someone else and wasn't sure what to think about it. Though she did realize this might be something to do with how a link is formed between the king and their peerage members when they join one. When she held them closer to her heart to see what else she could feel, she felt happiness, confusion, and a little bit of sadness coming from her unknown pawn and wondered what it might mean and what was going on in their life. Meanwhile, Grigori training room. As Azazel's headache went away, he came back to the realization that he was 1, no longer in the isolation barrier, and 2, seemed to be back in Grigori, and 3, looked like he may be back in time, as he could see a younger Vali back before the gender gun incident had happened, so he wasn't sure what to think anymore. As that thought hit him, so did the whiplash of what had happened right before he had died in the future timeline. What the heck is going on here? He said, completely putting aside the fight he'd been in before the memories came back until he heard first Issei try and talk, then Vali doing the same thing as her memories came flooding through. I agree, Azazel. What the hell just happened to us and why are we back in time? Vali stated, suffering the whiplash as well, but her mind caught up to the fact Issei was nearby quicker than it did for Azazel. And what the heck are you doing here, Issei? What's going on? Issei could only sigh at their responses as he knew this would not be a happy chat they were about to have, but he was thankful that he didn't have to hide anything anymore from them. I'm sure you both have a lot of questions, and I honestly have a few of my own, but can we go back to your office, Azazel, so we can talk in a more comfortable environment? Azazel had come out of his stunned state enough to realize what Vali had stated was true and couldn't disagree with Issei, as he wanted some answers himself, so he took the lead back to his office. Scene skip. After reaching the office and everyone calming down some, Issei took the reins to get started. I'm sure you both have a ton of questions, but how about I get my part out of the way first, then we can get to any questions that it doesn't answer. He said, getting a nod from the two at that. The year after we sealed Trihiksa, he broke free once more and we couldn't get a hold of anyone from the barrier field, so we assumed the worst. I spent 2 weeks fighting the beast all over the world and lost all my friends and loved ones in that time frame, and in the final fight where I thought I was going to die, I was pulled into the dimensional gap by Great Red, who gave me an option to get stronger. He offered me the chance to be sent back in time to my childhood to train to be stronger and to be ready to face the beast once more and hopefully defeat it this time around, and he would come back in time himself to help me out some from the dimensional gap as a voice of reason among other things. I hadn't been back in time long before I ran into you by chance at the park, Azazel, and we decided to approach you and see what would happen from there. At this point, Azazel stepped in since it seemed like Issei was done for the most part with his story. Okay, that explains a lot, but why did our memories come back? I've never known there was time travel magic, but I'm not surprised by that, or that Great Red would know that magic. All I honestly know about that is there is a chance for people close to me, both friends and enemies alike, to regain their memories after a trigger occurs in their lives, but past it I can't tell you. You two are only the third and fourth to regain their memories, and the other two had it after seeing me fight away some bullies at the park the same day I met you in this timeline, Azazel. He said, getting looks of interest from both of them as Issei remembered something else. Though also on that note, right when I woke up in this timeline, I had a headache hit which leads me to believe someone else has remembered, but I have yet to run into them. Nodding her head at those words, Vali could see what he was saying while still stunned at everything that had happened, both in the previous timeline as well as this one. That's true, since we all know how many different people you've met in just the supernatural world. Though I would know less than even you, Issei or Azazel, on the subject, even I find it weird that someone regained their memories without even meeting you in this timeline. Azazel had to agree with Volley on that, but couldn't help a nagging feeling come into his head he couldn't place yet. I haven't heard anything in the rumor mill about someone regaining possible memories or flashbacks, though I don't know if I would have heard about it happening, since the three factions are still in a détente right now, he said, as that finally triggered his memory that was nagging at the back of his mind, causing him to jump up in shock. Shit. We got to move now, he said, catching the attention of Issei and Volley. Volley, who one could say knew Azazel the best of the two, knew something had to be big for Azazel to be this scared. What happened? I forgot until just now due to everything going on, but I sent Barakiel on his mission that cost Shuri her life right before the latest spar, he said, generating a magic circle as Volley and Issei's eyes widened. While Issei had known about the incident, he'd completely forgotten about it since he had come back in time. Let's go. I just hope we aren't too late. He hoped they weren't too late as he knew how traumatic the event was for Akeno. Though when they arrived at the shrine, it was too late as it was already destroyed. Damn it, we didn't make it in time. You're right and it's my fault once more that this happened, Azazel said, pissed off at himself once more at the events that transpired, though in this case, his memories came back too late to warn him not to send Barakiel on the mission. Speaking of Barakiel, right at that time, the man himself popped up in a magic circle nearby. Barakiel. There you are. Barakiel had just teleported back to his family's home after the attack from his wife's family on Shuri and his daughter. He'd sensed the attack through the sensors he had put in place around his house when the attack started, but he was too late to save Shuri. But before he could get his daughter out of there, if she would have listened as mad as she was at him for not being there, he felt more enemies appear and went to deal with them, but got caught in a teleportation trap that activated too fast for him to stop. What he saw when he got back to the shrine was the house completely destroyed with no sign of Akeno, but he did turn when he heard his voice called out by his boss. Azazel. What are you doing here? Thinking fast as he didn't want to talk about the time travel part right now, he finally recognized what part of the precognition was that he dismissed when talking to Issei. I had a set of wards down that alerted me to something wrong at your house, but we arrived too late to do anything, he said, getting a solemn nod from Barakiel at that as he noticed the other two alongside Azazel. While he had known Volley for over a year at this point, he hadn't known Issei that long yet, though did consider him a good boy that seemed to know what he was doing. While he hadn't had the chance to bring Akeno to meet Issei, he had a feeling that they would have been good friends. But before he could comment anything else, Azazel stepped in first. I know you want to grieve Barakiel and trust me you'll have as much time as you want to, but how about we go back to Grigori to talk over what happened and not risk any more scenes here, he said, getting a resigned nod from the cadre at that. While Azazel would normally have possibly taken the scene at a lot more somber mood, he knew they should get away from the area for now and talk about it back in his office. With that, the group teleported back to Grigori HQ. As the group got ready to teleport back to Grigori, Issei suddenly felt a powerful urge to stay behind for a minute. Go on without me. I need to check something out before we go here in Kuo, he said, getting a nod from Azazel at that as the others left. Drake, did you feel that too, or was it just me? I felt something, but I couldn't place it outside of being in this area itself, so I would stay cautious if you were to look around. Drake agreed as he couldn't place what he had felt right as the group went to leave. As Issei carefully walked around the destroyed shrine, he noticed just how much power had to have been used to take it down, along with everything else in the area, but past that, he couldn't tell what type of magic was done to do it with. As he got closer to the shrine itself, he felt a tug to one corner of the house and went to it, only to find what looked like a fallen angel feather, which once he picked it up, he could feel was giving off the presence he had felt earlier. It also felt somewhat familiar. Drake, Red, any ideas? That would be Shuri's soul, as I was able to help at the last minute by bringing her soul to me before I put it in the feather you have, Issei, as I hoped that it would be found by someone, either you, Barakiel, or anyone else that the Fallen might send to investigate the scene, and I can't say that it's a bad thing that you found it first. Red said, having known how much this event had caused issues in the future and how Issei would want to help Akeno, so when he felt Shuri's soul still in the area, he had helped them out by putting it into the feather for someone to find. At the look of confusion from Issei, he continued. Don't forget, you can carry items in the boosted gear just like you do Ascalon, so it's likely you could do it with this feather as well. Though in this case, her soul could transfer into the boosted gear as another entity living inside of it just like Drake does, so you would need to keep that in mind. You're my first host that tried to add anything to the boosted gear like Ascalon, so I only have this to go by, but I would think that if you wished to add the feather in like you did Ascalon, even if just to store it would work. If Shuri does wake up in the gear and can talk to us, I don't think it would cause any issues, and between all of us and Azazel, since he has his memories back, I think we could find a way to fix it if something does go wrong. Drake said after a moment of thought. If it had been before he'd met Issei, he felt he wouldn't have agreed to do what they were about to try, but he knew he wasn't likely to ever get another host like this one, for how interesting things have become, and with how things ended before they time traveled, he was willing to try some stuff he otherwise might not. Issei couldn't help but agree with the two of them in their point. He likely wouldn't have thought about her soul awakening if he put the feather into the gear for safekeeping, but it would make sense that something like that could happen, especially with the biblical god dead, as he could see that causing issues. He also agreed on the fact Azazel would likely be able to help them figure something out if it came to it. Let's do it then. I would normally not agree to something like this so quickly, but since you're okay with it Drake, let's do it. After confirming it with Drake, he called forth the boosted gear and put the feather on top of the gem after Drake's words on what to do with it. After he did that, he could feel some of the power from the gear come out and surround the feather before it was pulled into the gem. I don't think we will have to worry about Shuri's soul waking up anytime soon if I had to guess, so we should be fine for now, but you should warn Azazel now so he can be prepared if something does happen. Red commented, getting a nod from Issei as he thought about what to do next. Right as he decided to teleport to Grigori, he changed his mind and pulled out his phone to do something he had hoped would happen one day, as he sent a text to Kaori and Yui to see if they were free later today to meet someone. He thought about taking Yui and Kaori to see Azazel again, but was afraid to do it until Azazel regained his memories so it wouldn't cause any issues in this timeline. But that done and the promise to come get them later as he had something else to deal with first, he teleported back to Azazel's office. Scene skip. After he got back to Grigori, he learned more about what had happened from Barakiel than he had known in the previous timeline, since he'd only heard Akeno's side of the story. Barakiel had been sent on a mission to check on a possible rogue fallen angel that was skirting the lines, and Azazel knew he had to have someone he could trust check it out, and that's when Shuri's family struck, as they had been watching closely to catch him away from the house. They were able to kill Shuri before Barakiel got back due to the alert system he'd put in place, but he couldn't get anything else done due to Akeno trying to keep him away from her mother before he felt more presences outside, and when he went to deal with them, they had a teleportation trap set up for him, and he couldn't stop it in time before he got teleported out. By the time he got himself free and back to the shrine, the three of them had shown up, and that was that, as he didn't know what had happened when he was teleported out. Issei sighed in frustration as he heard what had happened, as he hadn't been able to help in this situation at all, since he hadn't known when the event actually happened last time. He had been secretly hoping to help his peerage mates where he could, even if from the sidelines this time around, and he'd missed his first chance now, but there wasn't anything he could do for them at the time. I wish we could have made it in time to help you, and you have my sincerest apologies for the loss of your family, he said, hoping that Akeno hadn't died in this timeline and had somehow survived the blast, but he had no way of knowing at the moment. Barakiel couldn't help but be thankful that this young boy was acting like he did, even if they hadn't much conversation or interactions between the first time they met and now. Well, I thank you for that. I know it wasn't anyone in here's fault as they struck while they had a chance. I knew that they hated Shuri for marrying me, but I never expected them to go this far. You're right, and I wish I had been able to help you out more than this, but this is an order. Take time off, go and see if you can't figure anything out from the remains, and don't worry about your work here. You need time to grieve and you'll have it. Azazel stepped in since he knew that this was something that Barakiel would need, and even if he hadn't gotten his memories back, he would have done this much and more for his friend. Once Barakiel left, after trying to say he didn't need the time, but Azazel and Vali finally talking him into it, Vali turned back to the original point of the meeting before they rushed off to the shrine. Much as I'm sure the two of you would love to keep talking about what just happened, and I would normally agree, but shouldn't we be getting back to what happened right before that, since there isn't a whole lot we can do right now, unless Barakiel asks for help, she suggested, having known Barakiel long enough to know he won't ask for help, for now, getting a nod from Azazel at that, and Issei accepted it, since he didn't know Barakiel all that well, to be honest. Issei though didn't have much left to comment on unless they had any questions. That's honestly all I have for now, though I do have a question, Azazel, for you, since I can now ask someone that was there when it happened, he said, before continuing after he got a confused look from Azazel. What happened in the isolation field that caused the beast to break free? If you don't want to talk about it yet, I can easily understand, but it's something we never knew in the future, or if we did, I never heard what it was. But before Azazel could comment either way, Issei had another idea. Before that though, I have some people that would love to see you again, I'm sure, Azazel, so let me go grab them real quick, he commented, before heading back home to get the Kendo girls and leaving a confused Azazel on who he might be bringing. Scene skip. After meeting up with the two girls and let them know that they were going to meet someone that they knew from the previous timeline that had also regained their memories, Issei teleported the three of them back to Azazel's office. Once the two girls had gotten situated with the teleportation, they looked around before seeing Azazel, which shocked them to see him once more. Azazel. They both cried out in shock at seeing their old teacher once more. Azazel for his part was surprised at who Issei had brought to see him. He had known that two others had remembered as well, but he wasn't expecting two of the girls that he taught well at teacher Akuo Academy, since as far as he knew, they didn't know about the supernatural. "Hello, girls. It's been a while," he said, before turning to Issei for some help in this situation. Issei could only laugh at the group as the girls turned towards him, wondering what he was laughing at the group for. "They know about the supernatural, Azazel, so you don't have to worry about that," he commented, getting an O from Azazel as he turned towards the girls, now understanding why they were here and why they didn't seem worried about the teleportation. They had a contract with Asia right before Trihixa broke free and learned of it then, and had their memories come back the same day I met you at the park. After he commented that, he turned towards the two again. "You know Azazel, but the other person here you never met in the previous timeline, so let me introduce you. This is Volley, and she was someone that helped me out in the previous timeline many times and is also my rival," he said, to the girls' confusion. "You know how I've told you about my sacred gear, and it's one of the strongest, right?" he asked, getting a nod. Well, Drake was not the only dragon that was at his level, and Volley here is the wielder of the sacred gear of the other dragon that was at the level, and the two had a rivalry that their hosts normally kept up. I'll go into detail more later, but thanks to events that happened in the previous timeline, we ended our rivalry and now work together. Yui couldn't help but notice one thing about the introductions. Why didn't you give us her last name? Due to family issues that are not mine to tell, she no longer goes by her last name, though she might tell you at some point down the line, he commented, getting an understanding nod from the two before Issei turned towards Volley. "You can trust these two and I'm sure you'll come to agree with me in time, but I felt I should say that now and we'll see what happens," he commented, getting a nod from her as Azazel stepped in with a comment. "From what I remember in my time as a teacher, I can agree with Issei on that, Volley, with these two, but does anyone have a comment before I go into what Issei asked before he left?" Kaori had one, though it was more of a confirmation than a question. Issei had already told the two of them that Azazel had been a part of the supernatural and where he had actually gone when he left, but he didn't say that he had met him yet, which while they had been talking back and forth, she'd realized that he hadn't likely told them, because if what she guessed was right, it might have caused issues until now. Just so we're all on the same picture here, everyone in this room has regained their memories from the future timeline, right? I'm guessing Volley and Azazel just recently regained their memories and it would have caused issues if you weren't careful, correct? I first talked to Azazel the day I ran into the two of you actually after our meeting and have been working with both Volley and Azazel in training on stuff that they could help me with while also getting in sword training with the two of you. They just recently got their memories back and after an incident that happened earlier, I decided to go and grab the two of you just so everyone that currently is known to have their memories back is caught up on everything," he commented, getting nods from everyone, though Yui and Kaori were going to ask about what he meant by everyone known being here that had their memories back, but then remembered that he said someone else had remembered when he first time traveled that he hadn't run into yet. We were about to dive into what happened from Azazel's viewpoint as he was in the barrier field where Trihixa was sealed when it broke free when I went to grab you two. Azazel nodded as everyone found a seat to sit on before looking at him. "You're right, Issei, and to be honest, while I know when it happened, I don't know how it did. We had just received one of our many supply runs we get occasionally when Trihixa let loose with this massive blast of power, stronger than I'd ever seen before, and aimed it at the spot where the supplies come through, and it somehow broke the barrier apart. Well, we had put backup plans in place for this type of situation. Trihixa hit too hard and fast for them to take place and stop it, though the one we had hoped would help actually seemed to have backfired in this case, as we had set it up to where the field would collapse and help us out more if he somehow found a way out, but it collapsed too late and killed us in the process, and the beast escaped," he stated, getting it all out before he pulled out some sake to drink to help calm himself down, while the rest of the group sat there stunned at the news. A lot of that might be an educated guess, but that's my take since that's all I can remember before I got killed. Whether the barrier had somehow weakened while we were in there fighting enough for it to break out, or just blind luck, I couldn't tell you, but we all know where that ended up. Kaori wasn't sure what to think. Well, she had heard some of what the supernatural world was about with having trained with Issei these past few months, but it didn't stop her wondering just what else had happened that none of the non-supernatural people knew about. Wow. I honestly don't know what to think about that. Is there anything we can do right now to help stop this beast from being released? At our current status, no. We don't even know where it was sealed by my father, the biblical god, and due to current situations, we can't ask either, he said, not wanting to open up that wound right now with these girls that his father was dead, but Issei stepped in as he knew what Azazel was thinking. I already warned them about that, Azazel. I knew it would be harsh and could have ended badly if I wasn't careful, but they honestly took it better than I thought they would, he commented, which gave the girls an idea of what they were talking about. It had been only a month after they had run into each other when he brought them into his room and set up a strong barrier before letting them in on one of the supernatural world's biggest secrets, the death of the biblical God and the original four Satans. While they were both definitely stunned by the revelation, they were able to understand why when they heard what he had been fighting before his death, seeing as they had already been warned about it. Azazel continued. How about, for now, we call this meeting done, since we can always talk more about what's going to happen from here at a later date, unless someone else has a comment. Issei was about to say he didn't when he remembered the feather. Actually, yes I do, though I'm not sure if you'll be able to do anything with it yet, he said, getting confused looks from everyone. To add a little backstory for you Kaori, Yui, right before I brought the two of you here, we had an incident where Akeno's mother lost her life protecting Akeno, and while we know she lived in the previous timeline, we aren't sure if she's alive right now or not, as we weren't able to make it in time to stop the incident in this timeline. He started, getting stunned looks from them as they realized who he was talking about, and they hadn't known she had that sort of trauma in her past. It's not my story to tell past that, but right after we got done with that incident, I felt a presence at their shrine and found to my shock a feather with Shuri's soul latched onto it, he finished, knowing that while the two Kendoka might not know the name, it would instantly register with Azazel, and he instantly gained a stunned look as those words registered in his head. I have the feather within the boosted gear as I figured you would be able to do something with it Azazel at some point if I saved it. Thank you Issei. I don't know what to say right now, but with this, hopefully, this will allow me to atone for this mistake much easier this time around. Azazel said, tears coming to his eyes as he thanked Issei for that save. Well, I wouldn't mind trying to do something now to help Barakiel. The technology of Grigori isn't strong enough to clone a human yet, and since the peace treaty is still years away we'll have to work this out later, Azazel said before they ended the meeting for the time being. Scene skip. As the night closed in, Issei couldn't help but look back at what had happened during the day. First, the memories coming back for Vali and Azazel, something he was happy had finally happened as he didn't have to hide anything from them anymore. Then the whole event with Akeno's family, something which he was still kicking himself for not being able to help them with since he had known about it, but with everything else going on in his life, it slipped his mind. Thankfully, everyone that had their memories back that he knew of was in the loop now on who knew what, and the Kendo girls had been able to get a room for the night in Grigori, and they would figure out plans for them tomorrow. But before his mind could go farther down that rabbit hole, a knock came from his door. Issei, can I come in? Vali asked, having come by to talk to him once they were alone. Speak of the devil and she shall appear. Issei thought, chuckling at how he'd been thinking about her not long before, and now she appears at his door. Walking up to the door to open it, he noticed she hadn't changed her clothes from earlier and seemed to have come here before going to her room. Come on in. I was just thinking about the day we had today. What's up? As Vali went to sit on the edge of his bed, Issei decided to pull up his chair from the desk in the room and sat in it backward to look at her more comfortably. What's on your mind? Vali wasn't sure where to start honestly, so just started with an easy subject. I'm sure that you've been wondering why I'm a girl in this timeline compared to when you knew me previously. Issei snorted softly at the way she put it but didn't disagree. Right before you barged into the office, I had realized that I would run into you at some point in my time I would spend with Azazel. But I wasn't expecting you to be a girl, I'll admit, and Red was the one that told us that you were the real deal, but wouldn't tell us what had happened as he had looked into it himself. If you want to tell me or not is up to you, as I'm not going to push you to tell me if it's something personal. Vali couldn't help but laugh at that part of Issei that she remembered from the previous timeline. It's not anything personal honestly, like my grandfather doing something to me or whatever. You know the gender gun Azazel had but swore to never use? She asked, getting a snort from Issei as he remembered it alright, and how much Azazel seemed to hate that one invention. For a little backstory, I only was a boy in the previous timeline due to that gun as it misfired the first time he used it and turned me into the boy you knew me as, and nothing he could do would change me back, so I was stuck like it. And to be honest, once I finally got past the shock and anger of it, I realized it could help me hopefully stay hidden from my family until I was ready to deal with them, though we both know how that ended. She said before looking down at the floor. Thanks to Albion's help, she was able to keep her emotions in check from the backlash that occurred when she regained her memories and her death, but she could still feel it in the back of her head. Thankfully, Albion seemed to have not been affected by it as much and was a big help. What she wasn't expecting was for Issei to get out of his chair to come and sit beside her. Issei couldn't help but notice it looked like she was still reeling from the effects of regaining her memories and what it might be doing to her. Since he hadn't died in the previous timeline, he didn't have a clue on what it might entail for someone having their memories come back like that. I'll admit I don't know the pain you might be going through right now with your memories coming back, but I'm here if you want to talk. He commented before she surprised him with a hug. Thank you. That means a lot to me. She said as she hugged him tight, thankful that he was here. Now that he had brought that up, she timidly tried to get into the next part of why she was here, though she wasn't sure how it would go. Now that we got this part done, onto the more embarrassing part. She started before Issei cut her off with a laugh. Let me guess, where do we stand between us? He commented, having expected this conversation for some time and getting a blush from her. He'd admit to thinking about it some, but he hadn't made any decisions on his end due to the previous timeline and until now, not sure what had caused Bali to be a boy in the past. I'll admit to giving it some thought and I'm not against it, but with everything that's happened in the past and now and I can't give you an answer right now, but I won't say I'm against it if we decide to try something out. Just remember about all of the other girls that I had in the previous timeline and hopefully will have again. He said, getting a nod from her as she accepted it and after giving him one more hug, left him alone for the night. Scene skip. 1 week later, Kyoto, Issei was making his way towards Yusaka's shrine as part of a job for Azazel. Azazel had been looking into ways he could hasten the process of bringing back Shuri and had found out that the Yokai in Kyoto might have a way to do it or speed up the process whenever it came time and had been able to get a meeting set up with Yusaka on getting the ball rolling at least and had sent Issei out as his ambassador and Issei didn't mind as he would love to see the two again. As he finally reached the stairs to the shrine, he started running up the stairs, but as he finally looked towards the top, he noticed two faces he recognized as Kunu and Yusaka, which surprised him that they would be waiting for him. Kunu was waiting happily for Issei to appear when she finally saw him running up the stairs. Once he finally reached the top, she couldn't contain herself at finally seeing him once again and jumped happily into his arms. Issei. You finally came to visit. Surprising him as he didn't know what to expect as he caught her and getting a sigh from her mother, but she smiled as well at seeing him. Issei wasn't sure what to think about what was going on, but the way they were acting made him wonder. Are they the ones that remembered when I first traveled? But if so, how did I not have 2 headaches? He thought to himself as he set Kunu down much to her unhappiness. Well, this is a surprise. Am I to assume you know what's happened? Yusaka was glad to finally see Issei and hopefully get some answers on what was going on and why they were back in time. If you mean that our memories are back then yes. How about we go inside so we can sit down and talk more comfortably? We have a lot to discuss. She said getting a nod from Issei at that as Kunu grabbed his hand and the 3 of them walked inside. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe and comment down below and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support the Deltans for writing that awesome fanfic and also make sure to comment on this story. See you in the next video. Goodbye.